All right, so Linus Tech Tips just dropped the second video of their 2026 Linux challenge, and I'll just get straight to the point. I will be reacting to this. If you don't know who I am, I'm Cameron Knopf. I develop stillOS, which is a atomic Linux distribution that is supposed to be the first truly consumer-ready Linux distribution, and it has things like native-like web apps and a curated app store, a layout switcher similar to ZorinOS, things like that. And I've also been a YouTuber in the Linux space for 7 or 8 years off and on, and even when I wasn't uploading on my channel, I was working for other Linux YouTubers. So with that, I really know my stuff, and we're gonna see if Linus right here knows his stuff, that being Linus Tech Tips, not Linus Torvalds. Anyways, let's start.
The Linux Challenge 2026 edition was supposed to be a 3-part series.
The setup, a task-off challenge episode testing day-to-day usability, and a conclusion.
So we've already seen the setup episode in our other video on the Linux challenge, but
then the first week was full of so many unexpected highs and lows.
We knew there had to be another video, especially after the Linux community exploded.
So for those who don't know, the last LTT Linux challenge, not the last video in the series that I showed off, but they've done this series in the past. Linus accidentally deleted his desktop environment on Pop! OS while trying to install Steam. And then in the last episode, he was having a bunch of issues with Cosmic, which, if you don't know, that is System76's new desktop environment. And it's supposed to kind of be like a merge of GNOME and KDE using its own iced toolkit for GUIs. And it's a really cool concept. It just is a little bit buggy at the moment because of how new it is. It's just a little unfinished. So that ended up screwing up Linus in his video where he was having issues with games.
And while Luke and I seem to have been praised for our choices, I can tell you guys firsthand that it has not been a smooth ride for me.
Yeah, he did pick CachyOS, which is an Arch-based Linux distro, and that is something that you shouldn't use an Arch-based distro if you're a beginner. The biggest issue is it's a rolling release that moves really fast, so sometimes you'll have packages just move from right under you, especially if you're a GNOME user. Like, Arch will just update GNOME before extensions are even updated a lot of the time, and then it completely breaks your setup. But I don't think he was using GNOME, he was using KDE, but that's just the biggest example of where Arch can get in the way. And actually, most of the news right here on the Arch Linux site is just manual interventions. So the Kia package right here, manual intervention. This one is just a change in default, but then NVIDIA, if you're on an older card, manual intervention. .NET, manual intervention. Waydroid, manual intervention. You guys get the point. That is why I don't recommend Arch to beginners, let alone the difficulty of installing Arch, but that's also why I don't recommend Arch-based distros. New part every 2 months.
I feel like I've got to start this by explaining my brain-dead choice of Pop! OS. It was amazing how many people got angry at me for picking the same distro that screwed me over last time. But if you got
Pop! OS has in the past been a really, really good option. When he got burned by Pop! OS the first time, that was just an unlucky bug. That bug was only around for a day, and it was fixed before the video went up. In fact, back in the day, I myself gave it a very, very positive review, and I loved Pop! OS. It was one of my favorite distributions. But as I said earlier, just right now, because of the new Cosmic desktop environment, it's just kind of in a experimental state a little bit. But I do expect this to get much better in future updates as they continue to work on the Cosmic desktop.
I was assured that the bug that I encountered when I was setting up Pop! OS was a one-time fluke, and then I got piled on for being so quick to abandon it. So this is me putting aside my past experience after seeing so many people, listicles, and chatbots that still recommend it.
So I'm not gonna lie, a lot of these listicles are just not very in touch with what people need out of a gaming computer. Just this random article I found, Pop! OS too experimental right now with Cosmic. SteamOS isn't even out officially. Garuda Linux is a good option, but because it's Arch Linux based, as I said earlier, you kind of have to know what you're doing. Similar situation with Manjaro, although I've had stability issues with Manjaro in my experience because they use their own repository separate from Arch. Ubuntu is a decent option, but it's not as good as it used to be. Fedora is a good option. And here's another one, SteamOS. Again, is this article AI generated? SteamOS 5 does not exist. We are on SteamOS version 3 right now. Bazzite is probably the best option for most people who are starting out on Linux and want to game. Ubuntu Game Pack I've never even heard of, I'm not gonna lie. This just looks like a community made like Ubuntu ISO, so I don't really know if I would recommend this. I haven't tried it though. Fedora Game Spin, why not just use regular Fedora? Same with Manjaro. Again, I've never even heard of the Manjaro Gaming Edition, and this does not look like an official thing from Manjaro, and it hasn't been updated since 2019. So yeah, these listicles are garbage. And then ChatGPT also isn't that helpful because it is trained on a lot of older Linux posts, and the landscape has completely changed over time. Like I said, Pop! OS used to be one of the best options, and right now it's a little experimental.
Linus, Cosmic is basically in beta. Don't you know that it's not ready yet?
Okay, this is a marketing issue from Pop! OS. So you cannot blame Linus for this. If you're a new Linux user and you go to the Pop! OS website and you go to the download page, let's just scroll down. Let's see if anywhere at all it says that Cosmic is new or Cosmic's basically a beta. Doesn't look like it just from my quick scroll through just now. Let's click on download. Okay, we have 4 different options right here, and none of them even mention Cosmic at all. Here they are, release notes, includes the new Cosmic desktop environment. Okay, but if you're a new Linux user, you're not going to know what that means, and it doesn't say anywhere that it's experimental and that it's a beta. I guess on-screen keyboard is in development. Cosmic will be continuously updated with new features and improvements after release, and you can follow Cosmic DE and improvement progress on the project board. So yeah, if you knew that Cosmic was a new desktop, these things at the bottom make sense, but if you're a beginner to Linux, where does that tell me that it's a beta and things may be unstable? So that is not Linus's fault. That's a marketing fault from System76.
Where does it say that? The thing that I downloaded was called LTS, or long-term support. That's like the opposite of beta.
That is true. On my downfall of Ubuntu video, I talked about how they shipped a brand new kernel that hadn't had enough time to be tested. And people are saying, well, over time, it'll get stabilized and be tested. Yes, that's true. But if you're a new user to Ubuntu and you're installing the brand new long-term support, you don't expect to be running a kernel that hasn't been tested. So Linus makes a great point right here.
I would have had to journey to a random blog post from back in September of 2025 to discover that Cosmic is now in public beta.
Yep.
Number 2, maybe this is a hot take.
I mean, it technically is out of beta, but I don't know if it should be out of beta with some of the issues people have with it.
Maybe if System76, a commercial entity, not a random open source contributor, knows that it's not ready for prime time, instead of blaming me, we should probably blame the company that shipped it. And you know what? Yeah, I could have come across some of the Linux YouTube channels that have highlighted these issues. But a key element of the Linux challenge is highlighting that unless you know to ask the question, is this distro's desktop environment in beta? It can be hard for new Penguin curious users to find the right answers. So
that isn't even a question that beginners for Linux should even have to be asking, in my opinion. If you're picking a beginner distro, things should just work out of the box. You shouldn't have to worry about things like that, and that includes Pop! OS.
As we keep going, it's important to think of the Linux challenge not as an attack on Linux, but as more of a pen test for how friendly it is to newbies.
That is true. I think a lot of the Linux community needs to be better at taking criticism, because criticism is how you actually grow and improve, not just in Linux, but in life. And so in situations like this, instead of trying to victim blame Linus for installing Cosmic, companies like System76 should be able to learn from their mistakes and actually put that Cosmic may not be ready.
My Bazzite adventure started a bit better than Linus at first, but if you remember in part 1, I mounted my SMB share. I was shocked at how easy it was to find, because normally on Windows, I would have to type in the address bar and find it. Versus on Bazzite, I just clicked on network and it found it right away. But I didn't realize that that wasn't mounting it. That was just creating a shortcut. This means my read and write permissions were all over the place, and I couldn't save some files to my network drive if I clicked on that shortcut. To solve this, I had to do some Googling, and I found out that I needed to modify my FS tab file to point the network location to the MNT folder on my drive.
Why can't you do this graphically? It is 2026 and not everyone wants to use a terminal. Why can't you do that graphically?
I tried at least a dozen different options in order to mount the share correctly, none of which ultimately succeeded, or should have even been necessary if you ask me. Opening context menus on icons, shortcuts, or applications is a great tool, and it seems like a big oversight on the Bazzite team to not include a quick mount option that just works.
That isn't the Bazzite team's fault. That would be the desktop environment. In his case, KDE Plasma would need to do that. That's a good idea. That should be there.
Instead, I want to F-stab myself in the head.
Meanwhile, I was having a grand old time on Cachie, and since I felt more comfortable than the other two guys, I decided to get a little bit daring. I uninstalled my entire Cinnamon desktop environment on purpose to see if I would run into any challenges. It took about 20 minutes max before I was up and running with KDE Plasma, and my only issue was that I had to clean up some small things left over from Cinnamon, like an additional sound icon that was in the bottom tray, because I had two sound icons and they could conflict and stuff, and that was honestly
That taskbar looks a lot like Windows 11.
also really easy to do, so no big deal. I had a Windows game drive previously that I just kind of left alone and tried to use on Linux, which means that it was formatted in NTFS. I just added it to my Steam library in Linux and tried to go. All my games showed up perfect and everything seemed fine at first. Some games even ran okay, but I started to notice some glitches, and even some games that I had freshly installed on that drive just wouldn't work. It would just, you click play and it just wouldn't launch sometimes. It turns out that while Linux can still use NTFS, and there's been some ongoing development to make it even smoother, even since we started this challenge, I can say in my experience, it was kind of rough, especially when used with Proton.
I honestly think that Linux should have better NTFS support, because there's going to be a lot of situations like Luke's situation where you want to share a game drive or even like a remote drive with Windows. And because the world runs on Windows, NTFS is just going to be a pretty common standard, and Linux not being able to run that very well seems like a pretty big oversight to me. Even if NTFS isn't even an open standard and needs to be reverse engineered, I think that is some work that should be done.
It doesn't seem to like it. So in my opinion, if you want to play games off of an NTFS drive, just don't. At least not right now.
My gaming experiences were mostly smooth, with two major exceptions though. One of which I'm actually gonna save for the conclusion, because it's kind of a spicy one, so make sure you get subscribed for that. But the other was actually the first game that I tried to fully play on Linux, Poppy Playtime Chapter 5. It turns out that the pre-rendered cutscenes weren't working. Proton, which is the compatibility layer that allows non-native Linux titles to work on Linux, is missing proprietary licenses for H.264 and H.265 video codecs. What was the solution? A community fork called Proton GE, which thankfully was in the Bazzite store. That's a pretty simple fix, but it's also one that highlights how unrealistic some Linux evangelists can be about the experience. No, in many cases, it doesn't just work out of the box, and users who don't treat fixing their operating system as a hobby will be looking for someone to blame for this hassle.
So this isn't really Linux's fault, because it is risky to just ship proprietary codecs like that. But I do agree, not every game is going to be an out-of-the-box experience. There will need to be some tinkering. Hate me all you want for that take, but that's just being a realist here. But I do think we are heading further into that direction, where one day I bet most games, if not every game that doesn't have kernel-level anti-cheat, will work out of the box. Hopefully, maybe I'm just dreaming.
So is it Linux? Valve? Mob Entertainment? The user? Maybe all? Or, hear me out, none? It's easy to jump on the blame bandwagon and hate on some developers for not prioritizing Linux. But ask yourself this: if 50% of your customers were on Windows, and the other 48% are on Xbox and PlayStation, would you be stoked on hiring a fourth group of employees whose job it is to deal with the other 2%? Especially knowing that those 2% are not running one OS, but are probably running different flavors of OS? I mean, maybe you would.
He makes a great point right there. However, also with modern technology like Flatpak, for example, the supporting various flavors of Linux isn't that big of a deal. You do really only need to target one platform. That is actually why there's a few games on Linux where the Proton version of the game actually runs better than the native version of the game, because they don't want to spend the time trying to optimize a Linux native port for what? 5% of Steam's user base. It's not worth it to do that financially. And at the same same time, Proton has just gotten so good that there isn't really a performance loss anymore for the majority of games when you're using Proton. And it's also just a chicken and an egg situation. We need Proton to actually make a lot more games playable so that other people will move to Linux, which will then drive up Linux market share, which will then have other developers focusing on better Linux support.
Enjoying the Linux experience requires a no-blame mindset. Some stuff's gonna work, and some stuff won't. It's not anybody's fault. Everyone is doing their best.
So with that in mind, throw out what I said earlier, because I'm not mad at System 76. In fact, I left Pop! OS on my main desktop just for the lulz, and it mostly worked for most things. With that said, when it came time to install Linux on my other systems, I did opt for something different. Starting with Bazzite on my home theater PC.
Let's go.
It's just too bad the Linux curse followed me there as well. Bazzite has different versions of their installer, depending on the brand of your GPU and whether or not you want the SteamOS full screen experience.
I will say that is one of the best things about Bazzite. That is something I will do in the future for stillOS, is have a little menu screen right here to help pick what hardware you're running. Although I only ship GNOME and I don't have a gaming mode, so it would just be your hardware type and your GPU vendor. That said, I also want to make a little tool that you can download on both Windows and Linux that will actually detect what hardware you have and grab the right version. Because if you're a complete beginner, you may not know that. Most people installing a Linux distro would know that, but I'm just trying to really reduce friction, as much friction as possible.
Well, I've got an NVIDIA GPU, and yeah, I want that experience. That's kind of the point of it on a home theater PC. So I picked this one, and let's put it this way. The Bazzite team feels that I should have known the one that I selected would result in a completely unusable experience.
That is a problem with Steam's gaming mode on NVIDIA hardware. And and Bazzite does warn about that, although I do think instead of being some red text, it should be a full screen pop-up so that you can't miss it.
But to me, that's actually not that obvious. Coming from the Windows, Google, normie world, where a stable service like Gmail was labeled beta for 5 years, it's not that unreasonable to think that you can daily drive a beta and have a mostly functioning experience.
I would actually disagree with Linus on this take. I remember I ran the beta for iOS 26 on my iPhone because I wanted to pull out the liquid glass as a party trick, which kind of backfired on me because it sucks. And I was having a lot more issues with that than any beta I've ever ran of any Linux distribution.
In Linux, that's an expectation that needs to be completely thrown out the window. Here, beta seems to mean this is broken, and if you're not a developer, you should probably just download the LTS, which...
What? He's basing this entire opinion just based off of Bazzite, but if you're running a beta version of Ubuntu, it'll generally be pretty stable with just a few bugs. And I'm not gonna lie, the Fedora betas, sometimes I can't even tell the difference between the beta and the full release. I've never had an issue with a Fedora beta.
Which might also be beta. Haha! Clearly we've got to reach a middle ground here, and Bazzite seems to agree because they have updated the messaging on their site.
Good on Bazzite for being able to actually take criticism and use it to improve their project.
Why run Bazzite when I could just run SteamOS on the Steam machine that we built on this channel like a couple months ago? I can't believe I forgot about this thing. I've been meaning to install it.
I actually ended up throwing SteamOS on my home theater PC.
Nice. Okay, is it a bit of a hack to just switch out your hardware? Yes, but also no, because a lot of Linux gamers would go out of their way to choose compatible hardware in the first place. So I'm pretending I did that. First,
I would also like to say, realistically, there's just going to be some hardware that doesn't work that well on Linux. And yeah, while in an ideal world, all hardware would work on Linux, I do think that part of choosing your hardware is picking the right tool for the job. And if that job is going to be running Linux, then you're going to want to pick hardware that is known to work well with Linux. To me, this is like buying like a Dell laptop and complaining that I can't run Mac OS. Now, like I said, better hardware support would be ideal, but just if we're being realistic, some of these companies are not friendly to open source and drivers need to be reverse engineered. It's a lot of work, and I don't think you can really blame Linux developers for that.
As for my laptop, I decided it was finally time to practice what I preach and go for good old-fashioned trustworthy Ubuntu. Sort of.
Ubuntu 26.04 just came out, so hopefully it ends well.
First, I have to get to the desktop, and day one was kind of terrible. After completing setup, it just...
Okay, he's on 2510.
And it sat there for hours. And I was like, come on, man, this is ridiculous. Then
Why would you not just give up after 10 minutes? Hours?
I came down in the morning and it was like Santa had visited because it was magically sitting at the login screen, and it's been downright pretty solid ever since, with a bit of a learning curve. For example, I did run into issues getting some applications to work due to downloading the wrong package. Debian packages, snap packages, and Flatpaks will all work on Ubuntu. But
We're back on the packaging wars. Let's see what he has to say.
I figured, okay, well, Debian makes the most sense since Ubuntu is based on Debian. But then after I installed OBS, I realized I had no option to select the display that I wanted to screen capture. The solution? Use the Flatpak installer, apparently. Okay, but where? The top result, as far as I can tell, doesn't convey that it's a Flatpak. Oh, right. I need to enable Flatpak search. Except that wasn't the solution either, because Wayland, which Ubuntu uses as part of its desktop environment, has a privacy thing built in that no likey screen capture. Now, it can be worked around, but threads like this one are a great example of how troubleshooting can often be a guess and check experience, because there are like 5 different solutions in here, and I actually can no longer remember which one worked.
That is weird because I'm recording right now on OBS on a Wayland system using the Flatpak, so I don't know what happened there. I do think that most Linux systems having 3 different packaging formats, native, Flatpak, and Snap. Most people don't use Snap, but also 4 if you include app image. But I do think that is really confusing because what a real user wants, they want to be able to open an app store, click an app, and click install and not have to think about it. That is why the stillOS App Center at the moment only supports Flatpak. We will be adding Nix package in the future, but it's not going to let you choose which one to install, because if you wanted to choose, you could just use the terminal. It's going to pick for you which one works the best, and that way you don't have this extra friction when you're just trying to do something as basic as install an app.
Of course, though, it's important to point out that every problem that we're having with Linux can also be a problem with Windows.
But the fact that
I'm not gonna lie, I almost never have driver issues on Linux because most drivers are baked straight into the kernel. Pretty much the only 2 drivers I've ever had to install on a Linux system is NVIDIA graphics and Broadcom on a really old 2012 Mac I had. Whereas on Windows, I've had this mini PC where I had to install 10 different drivers just to get it running. The laptop I'm recording on too, when I ran Windows on it, because it did come with Windows, but I did a fresh install like a year later because I needed Windows for something. I had to track down like 10 different drivers. Windows, when it's pre-installed, is usually a pretty good out-of-the-box experience, but when you're installing it manually from scratch, I've had much more problems installing Windows than I have with some of the more user-friendly distributions like Ubuntu and Fedora.
But the fact that Microslop is also bad doesn't mean that we shouldn't be honest about issues or like level of tinkering required with Linux. My laptop, for example, running Mint and a very simple use case of basically just loading a browser, hasn't required any tinkering this whole time and hasn't really had any problems.
Mint is great.
My desktop running CachyOS, I've intentionally tried to like put myself in harm's way and ran into some really complex scenarios that have been fun to diagnose and work through. But there are things that are quite simple on Windows and very easy to do that are more complicated on Linux. And that's okay. But trying to hide that fact in order to recruit more Windows users to join the community, I think does more harm than good.
I 100% completely agree with Luke here. And I will say it does go both ways. Windows isn't, for a lot of people, Windows 11 is a very, very stable platform. And part of why it's so stable is because it's not really that modular at all. There's not much to change, which also makes it so that there's not much to break. But at the same time, Microsoft does have a track record, especially with Windows 11, of pushing out bad updates that break things on Windows 11 that they're then forced to revert. I actually think Windows can be more technical than a lot of people think, but at the same time, Linux, especially the package manager system, can have some learning curves. And if you're just trying to use your computer, like you're trying to get your work done, maybe play a video game or two, a lot of people don't want to deal with any of that stuff.
Especially when they are, unfortunately, fairly often met with hostility from the community when they then run into these problems and are unequipped to deal with them.
I think that kind of depends on the distro. Like if you're on Arch, you're going to have a lot of people telling you to just read the manual. But I've noticed, like, especially the Fedora community seems to be pretty friendly.
I didn't. I use Adobe Premiere for editing, and one of the many fun ways that Adobe is...
Should have been using DaVinci Resolve. Just saying. I'm just joking. Make sure you use the right tool for the job, especially in a professional environment. I'm guessing at Linus Media Group, their entire team is probably using Adobe Premiere. So you can't just like switch to DaVinci Resolve and then expect the rest of your team to also switch to DaVinci Resolve to share projects with you. That's just not realistic. And that is also why people can't ditch Windows for Linux for software like Microsoft Word, Photoshop. I think there's CAD software too. There's a lot of different pieces of software like that where if you're using it for your job, you don't really have a choice but to continue using it.
Kinda ass is that it just doesn't work on Linux. Now, I tried messing around with Bottles a bit, which allows you to run Windows software on Linux.
Bottles
but
is
that
awesome.
was obviously still a no-go, which then sent me looking for alternatives. DaVinci Resolve has a Linux build, though it's only officially supported on Rocky Linux of all things. Still, Rocky Linux is a lot closer to Bazzite than Windows is, so maybe?
There's actually this project called DaVinci Box. I'm actually a contributor to it right here. DaVinci Box makes it very easy to run DaVinci Resolve on any Linux distro thanks to containers.
And yeah, after 2 hours of trying, I got her up
2
and running,
hours?
but not the way I thought. See, I just tried installing it like a Windows application. Download and run. But Bazzite, as I learned, is an immutable operating system similar to stillOS. This means core operating system files and permissions are locked down in such a way that the user either can't screw them up or they can, but then they'll reset themselves after a reboot.
I'm using this same technology here for stillOS actually. But yeah, there is a learning curve around that for more advanced tasks like this. That said, DaVinci Box does work on immutable distributions.
Unfortunately, this same lockdown applies to some software installers, which then means that they can't alter the files that they need to. The solution was for me to beat my head against a wall until I found this 6-minute video about a simple command to run. Hey, software installed.
That DaVinci
But then I ran
Box?
into the same video about the solution was for me to beat my head against a wall until I found this
It is DaVinci Box. I called it.
until I found this 6-minute video about a simple command to run. Hey, software installed. But then I ran into the same problem as Poppy Playtime. Depending on the file that I was trying to play or export, it wouldn't work. Frickin' curse you, video codecs.
So this happens on DaVinci Resolve for Linux because Apple and Microsoft pay patent holders to actually include some codecs into Windows and Mac OS. Whereas Linux, since we're dealing with open source, they can't really do that. So because of that, the free version of DaVinci Resolve isn't able to play a lot of these video files, even really common ones, without you having to convert the files in order to put them into DaVinci Resolve. It is shelved for now, but I am going to finish it eventually. But I'm working on a tool to not only help you install DaVinci Resolve, but it'll have a little folder that you can toss clips into. You just drag and drop them, it'll convert them in place, and then you can drag and drop them straight into DaVinci Resolve.
So I then tried Kdenlive, which is fine for basic editing, but if I want to be a power user, it's just not quite there yet. And for stills, neither is GIMP. You know what? I'm gonna be the one to say it. GIMP sucks.
I have a whole video about that. GIMP really does suck. I'm not gonna lie. It sucks that GIMP sucks. I want GIMP to succeed, but again, we're living in the real world.
The fact that people are stepping up against the corporate overlords who are limiting our choices, feasting on our wallets, and then spying on us for the corporate.
I'm pretty sure I saw
overlords
Pop
who are
OS
limiting our
flicker.
choices,
Pop OS is literally flickering in the background. That could just be the camera.
feasting on our wallets and then spying on us for good measure is amazing and it's admirable. However, context matters.
Oh, they actually put a note. Might not be related to Pop OS. So yeah, that isn't just the camera, I guess.
Experience of switching to Linux, we're doing so from a user perspective, and so we do have to point out things that might not be ideal.
That's how I think most people should be reviewing Linux distros. A lot of Linux distribution reviews are basically just a desktop environment review and whatever tools are pre-installed review. A lot of them don't really go into like the type of package base you're dealing with, whether it's bleeding edge, whether it's stable, whether the repo's big or small, and just the experience trying to run the system. Part of it is that you can't really do a full review on a Linux system unless you've ran it for at least post like 3 months, and if you're a YouTuber trying to make Linux reviews, then that's like what, 4 distros a year you get to review. That's why I don't really post a lot of distribution reviews on my channel. And at the same time, a lot of user errors can actually be prevented just from good UI and UX. There's a lot of situations where the user is getting blamed for not RTFMing, when in reality it's just a poor UX choice.
Try to understand that it comes from a place of love and appreciation, not from a place of hate. Everybody involved in the Linux challenge today is rooting for Linux to succeed. And it's actually been really exciting to see so many social media posts of people who have joined the challenge alongside us, even though we didn't ask anybody to. But
again, Linux really needs to get better at taking criticism.
And it's actually been pretty cool to see that some of our observations are already resulting in clearer documentation that's going to help pave the path for future users. Now, I know we're releasing part 2, like, way past the 1 month point already. Elijah was busy fixing our environmental chamber, among other things, but we do still have more videos lined up for the series, and as you guys can see, even though we're past the month, there will be some surprises in the future parts. Part 3 is going to have us do some fun challenges, and then part 4 is going to be the conclusion, where we sit down on the couch together and talk about our final thoughts.
There's going to be 2 more? Let's go. That's going to be a lot of views for my reaction videos.
Oh, and we'll probably also talk about our segue to our sponsor, ThreatLocker.
Good one.
ThreatLocker helps.
Overall, pretty good video, a lot of valuable feedback for Linux as a whole, but I just wanted to react to it because I thought it brought up a lot of good points. With that being said, if you enjoyed my reaction video, shoot me a sub up here. I'll have my first reaction video right here, and you can support a broke college student on Patreon right here. Thank you all for watching.